Today we're starting off our episode with the 21 Fart Gun Salute. Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's episode, we are talking about Despicable Me. It was directed by Pierre Coffin and Chris Renaud. The script and screenplay were by Cinco Paul and Ken Dario. And it is based on a story by Sergio Pablos, and we'll get into that in just a moment after I give you all of our producers: John Cohen, Janet Healy, Chris Meledandri. The associate producer was Robert Taylor, with executive producers Nina Rappaport as Nina Rowan and Sergio Pablos. Now, as said before, this film, was based on a story written by Sergio Pablos. So before we get into the actual film, let's talk a little bit about him and his story. Pablos originally worked for Disney, but he left the company about 6 years before Despicable Me came out. When he left Disney, he went to Spain and set up his own company, and this began his journey to become a better storyteller and filmmaker. He had many failed projects. The money his company had run out, no one wanted their projects, and they were feeling discouraged and were, quote-unquote, waiting to die, according to Pablos. Now, at this point, he began working on a little story and some drawings, and this helped him to kind of escape his reality a little bit. After he began work on his little story, an opportunity to pitch it to Chris Meledandri came up. Evil Me, now known as Despicable Me, was one of 3 stories that he had pitched. And Chris sort of tossed the other 2 stories aside and said, "I want this one to Evil Me." Now, Evil Me had about 6 or 7 pages of text written by Sergio Pablos, along with about 20 illustrations that were also done by him. So what exactly was Evil Me? The idea that got him interested was the idea of having a main character who has it in his nature to be bad. With this idea, he now needed a story for this character, and he thought, what is the polar opposite of this villain? The answer he came up with was Girl Scouts. 3 of them, to be exact. And there he had it. His story. A villain, 3 Girl Scouts, and a plot for world domination. This is where the heart of the story was born, because this is Gru's journey to learning how to be a father. Now, something to note is that the Minions were not a part of the original story that Pablos had worked on. He had it in development in the first stages for about a year, and then Illumination came in and took over. And Sergio said that they did a great job on the film. So now that we have that background on the man who wrote the story itself, we can now get into the film itself and what it took to make that a reality. Now, a quick summary of the film, because it did grow from what Pablos had into a completely fleshed out, full animated motion picture. Now, before we get into it, I'm going to give you a quick summary of what this film is. Now, Gru is an evil mastermind, and he has a plan to steal the moon. For his plan, he adopts 3 orphan girls to help him enact it and beat his competition. And along the way, both he and the girls grow fond of each other, and his plans change. And a movie is not complete without a script, and writing an animated film takes a couple months. But while it's being written, it is also being worked on in animation, and we'll get more into that a little bit later. And throughout the course of production, the script is being edited and changed, and production can last 2 or more years. The screenplay was written by Cinco Paul and Ken Dario, and before working on Despicable Me, they did Horton Hears a Who with Chris Meledandri. And before doing Despicable Me, they did Horton Hears a Who with Chris Meledandri. After doing Horton Hears a Who, Chris told Cinco and Ken he was going to start his own company, and he wanted them to be his writers. They agreed and signed a contract for a certain number of years. Chris pitched them Sergio's story and showed them some of his drawings, and they really liked it, and they signed on to the film. Chris and Ken knew that they wanted Gru to have an accent, so they chose a low Latin accent that Cinco said was similar to the accent that Ken's father-in-law has. They started writing and delivering lines that way to create a character, and this brought the character to life for them around this time. And according to Cinco, when Carell came on, they mentioned it to him and he liked it, but he wanted to come up with his own voice. So he did. There are some things in the movie that Cinco and Ken did not write, but instead they were added during storyboard. An example of this is the minion getting cracked like a glow stick. That was added in storyboard. And one thing that people think they didn't script is when the girls are saying, no cookie deliveries until we do dance class, and they fold their arms, and Agnes tries to figure out how to fold her arms, and many find it surprising when they learn that that part was actually scripted. Both lines and actions were written down by Cinco and Ken. And they wrote the script based on drawings that they got from Pablos, and his story is obviously different from the final product, but they used that as a kind of blueprint for what the film was going to end up being. And when they started writing, Pablos had a bit of a story. It was Gru versus a good guy, and then they took that, made some changes, and wrote a script out of it. For animated films, as soon as the screenwriting starts, the movie is being made. People are doing character design as the script is being written. So they are writing this script, handing in pages that they've finished, and then those pages that they finished are now being worked on. And if changes need to be made to the script, it goes back to them. And it's just a back and forth game of constant writing and development and production and animation. It's all being worked on at the same time. So as soon as they would finish the first act, they would send it in and it would go into the storyboarding process, and then they would begin work on the second act. But while they were working on the second act, they would still get pulled in to make changes and help with the first act because it is being storyboarded and some things in it didn't make sense, or they needed to make a couple changes and they needed to be involved in that. And there were some things that they wrote that made sense in writing, but when they storyboarded it and put it all together, when it was drawn and put in order, it didn't make as much sense as it did when it was written either. And then the way Cinco and Ken work together when they write is each of them will write 5 pages. Then they will come back and they'll share the pages that they wrote, and then they'll come up with more ideas or make changes to what they brought in. And that's kind of how the whole scripting and screenplay process of this worked. Really, it was never done in writing until the movie itself was finished. But once you have a script and you have that storyboard and the movie is somewhat fleshed out, you have to bring in cast. And when they were casting, what they did was they sought out actors that had comedy and improv backgrounds. In the casting department here, we have Holly Dorff. She was in charge of the voice casting. Mary Hildego was the casting consultant, and Julie Hutchinson was the casting executive. So for our fantastic cast of Despicable Me, we have Steve Carell as the voice of Gru, Jason Segel, the voice of Vector, Julie Andrews as Gru's mom, and she actually thought the script was well written and the movie was a sweet, unique individual film, which is part of why she agreed to do this film. We have Will Arnett as the voice of Mr. Perkins, Kristen Wiig as Miss Hattie, Miranda Cosgrove as Margot, Dana Geyer as Edith, Elsie Fisher as Agnes, Pierre Coffin as the voice of Tim, Bob, Mark, Phil, and Stuart. Those are some of our minions. Chris Renaud is the voice of Dave, also one of our minions. And Jermaine Clement is the voice of Jerry, also one of our minions. We have Jack McBrayer. He is the voice of the Carnival Barker and the Tourist Dad. Danny McBride as Fred McDade. Mandy Kyling as the Tourist Mom. Rob Hubel as the Anchorman. Ken Dario as the Egyptian Guard. And Ken Jeong as the talk show host. Jason Segel, who was our voice of Vector, This was actually his first time doing a voiceover for animation, and he said it was intimidating at first because you're alone in the booth and people are kind of just staring at you from the other side of the glass. Julie Andrews said she didn't know why they chose her unless they wanted to go against everything she had done before, but she was glad that they asked her to be in it because it was, in her words, awfully fun. And development for this film officially began in December of 2008. So this film took roughly 2 years from beginning to end to be made. And when production began, Illumination only had 35 people on its staff. So what they did was Illumination partnered with MacGuff, which is a French animation studio, to help them make this film. Oh, and after that, the film was made with around 100. No. And after they partnered up with MacGuff, the film then had 100 artists that helped make the film. And at some point during production, Chris Meledandri thought that Gru was too evil in the beginning. He wanted it changed. But Carell disagreed with him, saying that Gru needed the edge that he has in the beginning, because without it, there's less emotional impact of Gru's fatherly love in the end. After that, Meledandri kind of just let Gru's character be and didn't make any changes to it. And we have the original concept art. I actually have a link down below for it goes to one of the websites that I found some of the original concept art on. And if you would like to see it, you can click that link down below and you'll be able to see some of the original concept art. Some of the original concept art for Gru was kind of Dracula-like. Think of when I saw it, what I thought of was Goob from Meet the Robinsons. Like it was kind of like if Goob had gone full evil, and that's kind of what Gru looked like, at least to me. But he was very Dracula-like. And later, he was actually modeled off of Goldfinger from the James Bond films. And then here we can get into the Minions. And originally they weren't in the script, right? They were added later on during production. They were actually created by the directors and Eric Gulan. I don't know how to say that name. I do apologize if I said it wrong. During production. They started out kind of like stormtroopers, and the design for them was more human-like. But they didn't have the money to create something like that in their film. So they evolved and turned them into the little yellow pill minions that we have now. The inspiration for the minions came from the Oompa Loompas from Willy Wonka, the Jawas from Star Wars, and from silent film stars like Charlie Chaplin and the Looney Tunes. All of the minions were male because Pierre Coffin couldn't imagine a female minion. And his reasoning behind this is because the minions are all dumb and stupid. The minions have their own language. It's known as Minionese, and this language was invented by the directors. It's a mix of gibberish, English, Spanish, French, Italian, and Indonesian. And some of the minions, a majority of them actually, were voiced by the directors. And when Carell was introduced to the minions, they gave him a description of them, and his reaction after being given the description of the minions was kind of like oh, okay, good for you guys, I guess. And he was kind of skeptical of them at first. But in a later interview, he said that adding the minions was actually a stroke of genius. That's all I could really find on the development and real production of this film. So now we'll move on to the score and soundtrack. The score and soundtrack, they were composed by Pharrell Williams, and I apologize if I say this name wrong, Hator Pereira. Pharrell Williams was excited to finally get to do his own score. It was something that he never thought he would actually get to create. And Despicable Me gave him the opportunity to finally do that. what they were going for was a contemporary sound for the film. Pharrell Williams wrote one of the songs, Prettiest Girls, and it kind of has a big band and R&B kind of feel to it. And the goal with this song was Pharrell actually wanted to try to combine the genres together. And I really like the score and soundtrack to this film, but I also really like the score and soundtrack to a lot of films. I think they did an amazing job with it. I couldn't really find much else on the score and soundtrack, so we'll move on now to the box office and release of the film. Despicable Me was released in the United States on July 9th in the year 2010. On opening day, the film earned $56,397,125. Domestically, the film earned 251,630 wait, that was wrong. $251,639,815. And internationally, the film earned $291,600,000. And then worldwide, when you put those together, the film earned a whopping $543,239,815. And just like every other movie we talk about here, I do like to go over some of the awards that the film has won or been nominated for. So we are going to do the same thing here. Now, Despicable Me has 41 nominations and 3 wins. We're going to go over all 3 wins and just a couple of the nominations here. At the Annie Awards, the film and people involved in the film were nominated for several awards. The biggest ones, it was nominated for the Best Animated Feature. Pierre Coffin and Chris Renaud were nominated for Best Directing in a Feature Production. Steve Carell was nominated for Best Voice Acting in an Animated Feature Production. And Pharrell Williams and Heitor Pereira were nominated for Best Music in an Animated Feature Production, all in 2011 at the Annie Awards. At the ASCAP Film and Television Music Awards, Heitor Pereira and Pharrell Williams were nominated and were the winners for the 2011 ASCAP Award of Top Box Office Films. Despicable Me was nominated in 2011 for the Best Animated Film at the BAFTAs. It was also nominated for the Best Animated Feature at the Critics' Choice Awards. And at the Golden Globes, it was nominated for the Best Animated Film in 2011 as well. At the Kids' Choice Awards in 2007, Despicable Me won the Blimp Award for Favorite Animated Movie. And at the Women Film Critics Circle Awards in 2010, it was nominated and won for the Best Animated Female. I had no idea that was an award, actually. And that is the very brief version of how the film Despicable Me was made. But with a movie like this, you also have the social impact of the film. This film was a very, very successful movie. It was a huge, huge, huge success. And with huge success comes a lot of things in society as well. And the social impact of this movie, I would say it was pretty big. Despicable Me, as said before, was a huge success, and a lot came from it. We have games, sequels, Minion shorts, spin-offs, attractions and theme parks, whole lands, and even costumed characters. In 2010, a game titled Despicable Me the Game came out, and it actually was released 3 days before the movie was. In 2012, Minion Mayhem opened up in Universal Studios Orlando. It was announced in 2011 that it would replace Jimmy Neutron's Nicktoon Blast. And in July of 2013, we got an addition to the Despicable Me universe with Despicable Me 2 and the Minion Rush mobile game. In 2014, Minion Mayhem and Super Silly Funland opened up in Universal Studios Hollywood. Those 2 things replaced T2 3D Battle Across Time, Coke Soak, and the Land Before Time adventure. In 2015, the Minion spin-offs and prequels began with the Minions. And in 2017, we got Despicable Me 3, and Minion Mayhem opened up in Universal Studios Japan. That one replaced Back to the Future, the ride. In 2021, Minion Mayhem opened in Universal Studios Beijing, and it was actually an opening day attraction there. 2022 brought us Minions: The Rise of Gru, and 2023 brought us VillainCon Minion Blast and the Minion Land in Universal Studios Orlando. And these things replaced the Monsters Cafe and anything Monsters related, really, in Universal Orlando. And the most recent addition to the Despicable Me universe is Despicable Me 4, which came out in 2024. And in the future, Minion Mayhem is expected to open in Universal Studios Singapore as part of the Minion Land. And Minion Mayhem in Singapore will be replacing the Madagascar A Crate Adventure attraction. And I'm sure there are more Despicable Me and Minion movies that are being planned and might even be in the works as future projects. There's even a chance that, because this is coming out so late in 2025, that Minion Mayhem attraction is already open in Singapore. So as you can see, the Minions really have found their way all over the world, in theme parks across the world, and into the homes of many people. I know I myself have Despicable Me 1 through 3, as well as the first Minion movie in my DVD collection. I've got just a little bit more for you. Also located in the parks, you can meet the characters from the film, both human and Minion characters. And the original voice actors make a return to voice the characters in Minion Mayhem. And people like myself, they like to go and dress up to see the films. You can find it all over social medias. People would dress up fancy to go see the new Minion movies. I like to dress up as a Minion to go watch any new Minion or Despicable Me movies. And it is very popular amongst the young and the old, the Despicable Me movies and the Minion movies. But one thing with the Minions, what I've noticed is it's a love-hate relationship. You either love the Minions or you hate the Minions. I personally absolutely love the Minions. They are truly my people. I love the silly things that they do, and some of the silly things they do, I wish I could also do, but alas, I'm not an animated yellow pill guy. I am a human being who shouldn't be doing those things. And last but not least, for our social impact, we also have the toys that have come from these films. We have Legos, we have costumes. An example of the toys that have come from this is fart guns. I myself have a mini fart gun. I know there are fart guns that even have a banana scent built into them so that when you pull the trigger, it smells like bananas. Lots and lots of things have come from this film, and it pulled Illumination into the animation race in film, and it's brought a lot of great things into the film industry, and it has helped to further advance the animation technology. And that is everything you need to know about how Despicable Me was made and how it impacted the world and society today. Thank you all so much for listening, and I will see you all in the next episode.